Painless Parker was a dentist who practiced in New Brunswick and the United States in the first half of this century. His flamboyant manner and shameless self-promotion built him a bit of a reputation as a renegade and a fraud, even a charlatan, or even a quack. But Halifax dentist Peter Pronich says that history's got it all wrong. He thinks Painless was, in fact, a pioneer, the Henry Ford of dentistry. For 30 years, Dr. Pronich has been researching the life of Painless Parker. Now he's written a book about the dentist's infamous career, and he's with me now. Welcome to Mainstreet. Welcome to Fredericton.
Hi, Jeff. How are you today?
Just great. When's the first time you heard the name Painless Parker?
Well, I was a dental student in dental school, as you said correctly, about 30 years ago. And I had just given an injection to my very first patient, and the patient turned to me and rubbed her face and said, "Gosh, that was good. I didn't feel a thing at all. I think I'm going to call you Painless Pronich." Well, my instructor happened to walk behind me. He gave me a sign and motioned to me to go to the end of the hall with him. I left my patient with quite a bit of concern because I didn't know what it was all about. I thought I was going to get a good bawling out for something I had done wrong. Mm-hmm. In actual fact, he told me that I wasn't the first Painless Parker. And there was a Painless Parker from New Brunswick, a real honest-to-goodness outlaw, an outlaw dentist. That morning, I had been given an assignment to do a term paper on an ethical situation in dentistry, something to do with outlaws.
Right.
And the two words clicked. And since then, I've been doing a lot of work.
And he just kind of piqued your interest from that day, 30 years ago.
He really did.
How exactly, we call him a bit of a renegade, how exactly was he a bit different from other dentists of that day?
Well, he was very untraditional, unconventional. He was very flamboyant. Dentistry at that time was very traditional. It was being practiced out of the dental offices, which were similar to the dental parlors of Boston. A dentist was considered to be a professional person, to be very dignified. Mm-hmm. Painless Parker wasn't any of those things at all. He wanted to treat the common person. And we have a lovely little aphorism from his own works where he says, "I would rather treat the brown rats than the white rats with the pink eyes."
What was dentistry only available to the rich back then or something?
At that time, it was very expensive, and dentistry could only be afforded by people who were of means. And the common person was left to struggle with toothaches, with infections, and teeth that weren't being looked after very well at all.
We know he was born near St. Martin's along the Bay of Fundy. Do you know what he was like as a child growing up there?
Well, this is where he got his background. St. Martin's and Tynemouth Creek, where actually he was born in 1872, was a very rugged area. And this was very important to him because
Still is,
because he fell back on a lot of things that he learned as a child. He did some wonderful things. He tried to fly across the Bay of Fundy. He collected pigeons all summer, put them in a barn loft, and then tied a string to each one of the pigeons' legs, and the other end he attached to a basket. He jumped into the basket, but unfortunately he had no control of the pigeons. Instead of flying up, they flew down and he lined up in a manure pile. Got a good trashing from the farmer because he'd scared his cows at the same time. That was just one of the examples of his growing up, and it really set a pattern for the way his life was going to go.
And he spent his first days as a dentist here in New Brunswick, right?
Yes, he did.
What do you know about his practice then?
Well, we heard some really colorful stories, and I have to admit that some of the stories that we have were primarily from Painless Parker's own writings. But
he kept a diary or something?
He kept wonderful diaries.
He did, huh?
But unfortunately, those diaries were destroyed in a fire in his ranch. He had a huge ranch in California near the latter part of his life. Mm-hmm. And unfortunately, those were lost. But he had started at that particular time to put his memoirs and his recollections together. But the stories here of him traveling around New Brunswick they're really wonderful because he had started off here as a traditional dentist, following the respected dignity of the profession at that time. He had started his practice in St. Martin's, worked there for 3 months, got only 75 cents, only by accident because somebody was passing through town and needed a tooth pulled. So he extracted it. He charged him $1. The guy only had 75 cents. And he said there's got to be a better way to make a living. So, the story just went on and on as he developed a better technique. First thing he decided was that people didn't come to him because dentists caused pain.
Right.
So he wanted to have people think of him as someone who didn't cause pain, so he used the word painless. And that actually was coined when he was doing his first shows at Hampton, outside the hotel.
Was he really painless?
Well, he really was painless because he concocted, he and a chemist from St. Martin's at that time by the name of George O'Mallory had concocted the first type of local anesthetic, the material that we use now to freeze your gums. They put it into a horse syringe, injected it into a dog. The dog lived. Then they injected it into each other.
Yeah.
And to see if it was really effective, they cut each other's gums with a scalpel. They couldn't feel anything. So Painless has used this as part of his armamentarium. The other thing he capitalized on was the power of positive suggestion. He would convince the person that it wasn't going to hurt. In fact, he was so strong in his conviction that he would tell the person that if they felt anything at all, they would get $5 if they felt anything at all. So he backed his claims up with a guarantee. But in those days, it was rather interesting how he worked because one of his traveling dentistry shows, we have quite an accurate account of it. And I'll just like to tell you how it was set up so you can picture in your mind. He had a flat wagon, and on the back of that flat wagon, he had a Morris dental barber's chair. And he had a band, all gaudily decorated with the red and white jackets. Yeah. He had a bass drum on one side, and he had a trumpet, and he had a banjo.
Didn't look anything like the dentist offices of the day.
Not at all. And this was outdoors. You have to remember, this is outdoors, and this actually happened about 110 or 120 years ago here in New Brunswick.
So he'd arrive into town, he'd be looking for customers. And
exactly. And
you'd sit in the chair, and what would happen?
Well, actually, he attracted the customers by the Dixieland Band. They played music. Everybody heard the music.
Lure them in with the music and then take out their teeth.
That's it, exactly. And then he would parade on the stage, and he actually developed his spiel after a minister in St. Martin's who was preaching about the evils if you didn't do the right things in life. So Painless patterned his spiel on his sermons, and he actually introduced dental hygiene or dental education. Dental awareness actually is what he tried to do. Tell people that they really needed to have their teeth looked after. So he would go around on the stage, gaudily decorated. He had a beautiful cut beaver hat. He had a tails and top coat done in green and red, a vest of bright yellow. And on top of that, just to show he was a professional person, he had a white clinic jacket, just to make him look like a dentist.
Yeah.
So he would go along, he would preach to the people, and then he would say, I need someone from the crowd to come up, and I will show you how I can do painless extractions. So he would point somewhere in the crowd. The crowd would then grab who they thought they were, and just literally the mass of people push him up to the stage. The person would end up on the stage, Painless would grab him, plunk him in in the barber's chair that he used at that time for a dental chair.
Yeah.
And then he would have the band start to play. And you have to picture this now. On the right side was a drum. On the left side was the banjo. Right behind the patient was a trumpet. When the time came for the extraction to take place, Painless would parade around. He knew that somewhere in that mouth the person would have a rotten tooth. And so he also had sewn into the sleeve of his jacket his extraction forceps. So he would parade around, give the crowd what they wanted. He would really get them worked up to a frenzy. Then he would nod his head. The band would play at a very high level. And the poor patient was caught between the drum, the banjo, and the trumpet.
And the dentist.
And he didn't know where he was. He was just completely freaked out.
Yeah.
Just completely in a daze. So Painless would wander around, and then when the time came, he would come up to the patient and slap him with the flat of his hand on his chest. That did two things. It had him open his mouth, and he also expelled the air. He had found before that if the patient had a lung full of air, he would scream if it hurt.
Oh, I see, so but you can't scream if you have no air in your lungs.
Exactly.
Oh.
So the patient would have the mouth open. Painless would flick his little extraction forceps into his hand, into the patient's mouth, grab a hold of a tooth, and pull it out.
And if the patient felt any pain, he was in no position, he or she was in no position to...
Exactly.
Oh,
exactly.
Did he pay the $5 out very often?
Not very many times.
It's so theatrical, huh?
He was. Yeah. He really was.
There was even a Hollywood movie made about him, right?
Yes.
Paleface.
Paleface.
Bob Hope was in it.
Exactly. Jane Russell and Bob Hope. Bob Hope played the part of Painless Peter Potter. Mm-hmm. Now, you can see the play on words there.
Yeah.
And Jane Russell played Calamity Jane. She was a cattle rustling queen who would get exempt from prosecution if she did something good. So it was her job to bring in the cattle rustlers, Painless Peter Potter was a bumbling dentist. And actually, that was very Hollywoodized because, in actual fact, Painless did extract a tooth of an Indian chief. It was done at Blackfoot Crossing, just east of Calgary.
So it wasn't really his life story, but it was certainly, there were lots of elements of his life.
There were a lot of elements that Hollywood had taken, and they never gave Painless Parker any credit for
Really?
it.
His, I want to look at something here in the forward. Painless Parker's daughter is still living, right?
Yes, she is.
And she's written in the forward to your book. Let me just read you a couple of lines here. The world viewed my father, Painless Parker, as a showman who loved the public eye, sought action, controversy, and adventure. I believe this story will give my father from the grave the last word against his critics. The professional respectability which he failed to achieve in his lifetime is finally his 41 years after his passing. That's really nice.
It is.
How do you think he's going to be remembered now after your research?
Well, I think history, as with other people in history, will take and become a lot kinder to him. And he will actually receive credit which he didn't receive when he was alive. He was constantly battling with the dental profession for the things he was doing. And I think now when we look back at this, we see that Painless Parker, in actual fact, was about 100 years ahead of his time.
It's a great story, and it's even better that he's from New Brunswick, huh?
That's right. He's your native son, and I'm really surprised that it's taken all these years for someone to get his history together and bring a credit to the province that he was born in, because the province provided the background. They provided his environment. Painless Parker couldn't have survived it. He wasn't a rugged individual.
Look, thanks very much for coming in. I know we've just kind of scratched the surface. There are so many other stories about him. I guess they'll just have to see the book to find out more, huh?
Yes.
Thanks very much for coming by.
Thanks very, very much.